So Android APS, there's not a lot of like help you step-by-step videos. So I'd recorded an earlier version of this, which I don't think it came out that great. It was a little bit long. So I wanted to create kind of a user guide for a little bit about my experience with Android APS as opposed to looping with the Loop app. So if you're starting here and you're brand new, I've got my pump. This is an old Medtronic pump. I have a Riley Link, which is the device in a little white box over there. I've got a Libre. These are US Libras. Which is one of the reasons I'm not using Loop app. If you have US 14-day Libre sensors, you can't use the Spike app. More or less, you can't use the Spike app, which is two of your, on my phone I have Xtrip. That's the Android version. So if you wanted to use the iPhone version of Xtrip, which measures all the data coming from your sensor, you use Spike on an iPhone. And unfortunately, the Spike on any iPhone is not going to be compatible with the US 14-day sensor. So that's one of the reasons that I went with Android APS. I'd say maybe it's the primary one. So if you want to use Loop on Apple, you either need Libras from outside the country. If you are American, you can order them from Canada, but they're going to be $75 each or so. That should be the price you should look for. That'll be $100 Canadian, about $75 US dollars. So yeah, so if you're in that category like me, what you can know is like I've got my Libre sensor, and I was buying them out of pocket. So if you have a good RX coupon card at a Walmart, it's $61 for two sensors, $30 a sensor. For me, that's super cheap. That's awesome. And I'll probably get covered for Dexcom in the future, but for now I'm using this. I had the one-time purchase of a transmitter, my Bluecon. Bubble might be better. There you can use Meow Meow, but Bluecon is working. That costs $160 or something. Get some batteries with it and patches to go keep it on. I had the $150 Riley Link, and I had my pump. And pumps, if you're interested in looping, just don't waste any time. Just go ahead and get an old pump. The websites where you can get that, Diatech is one of the websites. It's kind of like a forum where people, particularly a lot of them are in the looping community, will post that they have a pump for sale. And then you have to check the serial number on it. And depending on what the serial number is, you might also have to, go into settings and check the software version. So the resources that you need if you're doing Android APS or Loop, you have the Loop doc wiki. So the Loop wiki, it goes, top to bottom, left to right, walks you through the whole process of using Loop. That's for Apple. But in that Apple Loop wiki, you might even want to use that as an Android APS user because it has a great description of what Medtronic pumps are compatible. And that's also mentioned in the Android APS wiki. If you're in Europe, some of the AccuCheck pumps and also the Dana RS pump is also they're also compatible with looping with the Android APS. And if you can, I would support Dana. The company is a Korean company, Soil, Sooil. They, unlike all the other pump manufacturers, they said, we're just going to support the open source looping community, and they helped. They shared, whatever needed to happen for your phone to be able to connect with the pump to do looping. If you use the AccuCheck or the Dana, then you don't even need a Riley Link. The Riley Link is for the old Medtronic pump, and so the Medtronic pump is emitting like a, 933 megahertz or 450 something megahertz communication frequency, and it communicates with that and connects to your phone by Bluetooth, so it's a link. And then the other option, and I would get these if I could, and I might be able to coax my doctor. You have to get a prescription for the old Omnipods, and so make up an excuse and say, I heard people had problems with Omnipod Dash. I don't want Omnipod Dash or Omnipod Classic, the old one. There's a test strip. It's a blood sugar meter. You can test using your pump. You can say to your endo, well, I want to be able to test with the pump. Or you'll have to get to the point where you tell your doctor, I want to try looping. And I've also heard that the prescription for Omnipod is the same for Dash and Classic, and you can just tell Omnipod to start sending me Classic pods. So if you are on Dash already, call your Omnipod rep and try to make that happen. Okay, so this video, when I first got to Android APS, I was a little bit confused about the features. So there are the objectives. When you go through the process of looping with Android APS, you're going to spend about a month. For example, objective 4, step 4, is you can run connecting your pump and your CGM on open loop. So open loop, closed loop. Open loop, you'll get a bit of an alert, a little alert pop up that says your blood sugar is going to end up at 167 if you continue on this trajectory. Would you like to temporarily increase your basal to whatever, and then the target will be closer to whatever, then you can land in range, right? So on that note, when you're looping, I've got my target set, fixed variable to 90. I could make this 90 to 100, 90 to 110. I have heard, and so this is, if I keep it just at 90, what's going on there? What does that mean? Or let's say my target is 100 to 120. What that means is after your meal, after your bolus, you eat, some hours go by, all the insulin, everything plays out. It means that eventually you will land at 100 and 120. So when I say 90 is my goal, you can see there's a rise here. I ate something, and it's on a course that will bring me to 90. It doesn't mean that I'm at 90 right now. And so one of the resources that you'll want to look into is Dana Lewis, who I think is co-founder OpenAPS, not Android APS, but the third option that's there, OpenAPS. Her book describes an interesting model for that, of how to bolus really well. And so I would check out her book. I'll run through that really quickly. This might be in one ear, out the other. But what her research found, what she is suggesting, is insulin's peak activity is in 60 to 90 minutes. So let's say that I'm at 120 and eventually I want to eat. If I can bring my blood sugar from 120 to 80, and based on my standard deviation, or not standard deviation, my insulin sensitivity, that would take me 1 unit, would bring me down 40 points, right? If I take 1 unit an hour before my meal, or let's say I'm a little bit higher, I'm 150, how much insulin could I take that would safely bring me to like 90? So say that's 2 units. If I take 2 units an hour before the meal, that insulin will be at its peak activity if I eat. So that's kind of like an advanced method of pre-bolusing, is calculate, how much can I give so that the amount that I'm giving, the insulin that I give, is at its peak at the time that I start my meal. So I think that's interesting, just adding like that 1 unit there an hour before the meal. And then what she found is pretty much no matter how many carbs you're eating, they'll be absorbed after the original, you know, they'll be absorbed at a rate of around 30 carbs per hour. And maybe this is different, maybe I think it's like 35 or something like this, regardless of how much you eat. So that's interesting. So what she would then suggest to do is you take enough insulin to cover 30 carbs at each hour. So in other words, when I set my target range, that doesn't mean that's where I am all the time. That's where I land afterwards. And you still have to input the carbs you want to eat. And then if you get really good at looping, you might check out that Dana Lewis book and do what I'm talking about, so that what she's predicting is you can get to the point, and what her experience is, you can have a massive carby meal and be flat throughout the whole thing. So I think that's interesting. If you're looping, you are going to want to sharpen up your skills. So the looping, it's kind of like it I just want to finish talking about objectives first. So for 1 week before you can do a closed loop, where it automatically suspends your basal if you were going to go low, it automatically adds more, increases your temporary basal rate. If you're going to go high, before you can do closed looping, you do open looping, which is like, you get an alert that says, do you want to suspend your basal rate? So you do that for a week. So AndroidAPS incorporates that. And there is, a learning period there. So I think that that's helpful for me. I don't like the learning experience of it that much. I thought it was kind of crap. There's so many beautiful things that I could say about this system, about AndroidAPS. It's so filled with love there and enthusiasm. So I say that, as a friend, in a brotherly way, with love, not with any kind of hatred or animosity. When you go through the objectives, just this isn't really relevant, but I'm a teacher, and so I like to study educational theory. And we want to match someone's interest when they're ready to learn something with a really engaging learning experience. So that week of looping for me was not really filled with a dramatic learning experience. Maybe that's the way that I learned. Some people will have problems with question 3, or objective 3, which has all of these different questions, but the answers to the questions don't directly come from the manual. And so I kind of reverted, instead of trying to do research, I was like, well, I tried 3 times to do research to find this kind of technical answer. I'm just going to start, not guessing, but like, you feel like you kind of have to go that way. And I feel like, if the objective is 3, there's a question. Let's say the question is, how does supramicrobolus work, SMB? I think it would be much more useful if there was a 3-minute video discussing, this is what SMB is, this is what you should know about it. If you've never heard about it, this is what it is. When it comes to the way you're using it, this is what you need to know about using it. When it comes to troubleshooting, this is the things that you might have to troubleshoot. And then a final note, here's who it's for, don't try to use it for this. And try to align yourself. Like, I would have soaked that up. Like when you're thirsty, you drink water. That would have really interested me. But having questions that didn't directly come from the wiki, you had to think and reflect about them. Like, I get it, it's kind of like a trial experience, but so yeah. So that's why I say I wasn't all that happy with it. And another thing that could be done is, instead of being at an objective for a full week, um, to show that you are successful for 2 days. Even if you really mastered it for 2 days, like you're in open loop, you're keeping your blood sugar perfect, like to show that you mastered it is different than you're leaving the thing running and you're barely using it just so the week goes by. So one of the objectives, and this will be the last thing that I'll say, um, run in which one was that? Okay, so one of the objectives, I think it was 7, run for a few days and at least one night with no blood glucose alarms before dropping blood glucose. And it has a timer, 24 hours have to go by, and I'm thinking, during those 24 hours I actually made a mistake. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm not going to be able to pass the objective. But it still let me pass. But let me tell you what the mistake was. The, uh, I mean, just funny, odd, and terrible, right? Funny, odd, and terrible. I decided, because I've been experimenting with eating higher carb meals. Like, I've eaten the first 100 carb meal that I've had in more than a decade, looping. And it's worked out great, successfully. I'm a former Bernstein kind of guy. So that's, interesting. It's an interesting kind of, for me to be playing with that there. So after one of these huge, dramatic, I've never, eaten potatoes and rice like this, and I'm going to eat a potatoes and rice meal. Directly after I ate, and I dosed this huge amount of insulin, my Libre sensor gave me an error message: try again in 5 hours. Don't use it now, try again in 5 hours. So the Android APS is getting no data from my Libre, and I'm like kind of scared shitless. I'm like, okay, let me just check my blood sugar 10 times, and I ended up waiting that 5 hours. I waited till 2 in the morning. First my blood sugar did go a little bit low, and then it went really high. So I'm like, well, I'd really like to sleep here, and I feel like I took so much insulin relatively late into the night that I could, maybe I'm living alone, maybe I could kill myself here. So I went really high. I corrected that, right? So once the system turned on, I was high. I turned on my loop. Should be good to go. And then while I was sleeping, my phone got disconnected from the charger, and my phone died. And then, so not only was I high in the night, Loop made some corrections to bring me back down, but at a certain point, if Loop was on, it would have suspended my basal, and it didn't suspend my basal, so I went low. And when I looked at my CGM chart, I was low for a period of like a couple hours. So I went through that, and it still let me pass the objective. So it's not, it's not working. It's not tied to a learning experience. It's clearly like, you're just, let me get through this. It's kind of like work to get through it. So that's my little criticism is one, the videos, helpful voice to help explain these and all the features and how they work, and then to tie the objectives to results. Don't make it just about time, because when I really wanted to learn was when I first started that month, and it would have been great for the system to, in an interactive way, show me all these features. Like, if you want to give me a barrier and not let me do the closed looping, sure, but let me go through a learning experience. And it wasn't really a learning experience for me. So, for example, when I first started using this app, I see there's insulin, where I can just put in an insulin dose. And I can also click do not bolus, record only. The insulin should only be used when you have a high. There's no reason to enter this at any other time. There's a carb button. This, you can also, this should only be used when you have a low. So if you're low and you add a bunch of carbs, it will basically automatically, but there's a button here, start hypo temporary target. So it automatically increases your temporary target. So it's not trying to, keep you at 90. It's like, okay, So it makes your temporary target 120. What you should be using, and this is like why I'm doing this here, so I can walk through this kind of thing, is the bolus wizard. Right now, it says, just look at it, you get data. I'm missing 3 grams of carbs. It's predicting I'm going to go a little bit low unless I get this 3 grams of carbs. If I ate 20 units of insulin, it tells me, this is the amount of insulin. If I'm going to take 20 grams of carbs, this is the amount of insulin I would want to take. If I'm going to take it, in 20 minutes, you can include that. And then what's even better, you can press this I here, and you can incorporate other factors. So let's say I'm going to take 12 grams of carbs. It's saying I need 1.3 units. But what about, will that be the same given my 15-minute trend? And what it's expecting is in 15 minutes I'll have gone down 5 milligrams per deciliter, and actually the result should be a little bit less. Yeah, so at any point you check this to see where you're at. And this is especially helpful in open loop. It's like, say you're going low, it'll show you you're missing 20 grams of carbs. And as long as you input all the carbs you're eating and all the insulin you're taking, and that's probably the most important part of your day-to-day, whatever, you have to put in all the carbs you eat and all the insulin you eat. Otherwise, you'll treat yourself for low, take 30 grams of carbs, you'll start going up, but the system doesn't know you took the 30 grams of carbs, and it will imbalance the calculations. So on the screen here, closed loop, I can disable my loop, I can turn the thing off, say something's broken, my sensor turned off. I can suspend the loop or disconnect my pump. So this is mostly used, you go take a shower, you go swimming, I want to disconnect my pump for an hour, and at 1 hour it'll automatically start dosing you again. Local profile, there's the profile I'll get into. And then this 90 up here, I hold this, and it's temporary targets. So I can be really crazy here, I can tell the system, give me, oh, you really can't see that, make a target of 72 milligrams per deciliter. Or say you're going to exercise, you can set your temporary target to 140, right? So that's the main thing. If you're going low, you can set a temporary target that's higher so it doesn't keep driving you low. If you're going to exercise, you can set a temporary target that's a little bit high. And then every time before a meal, you can set a temporary target that is low. Bring me, after, whatever, bring me down to 90 before I start my meal. Set a temporary target. Actions. One thing that was really useful for me, someone showed me you can add some data here that's really useful, so it's always in front of you. My cannula has been in for a day and a half. My reservoir is yellow right now. I'll probably need to add more to my reservoir before I switch my cannula. My sensor, I forgot to, when I go to actions, I should have pressed CGM sensor insert, but I didn't. So my sensor, it says it's been on for 17 days, but this one's only been on for 3 days. And then the battery of my pump. So this, I've got temporary targets I can add. I can switch my profile. I can add a temp basal, especially when you're in open loop, you can add a temp basal. I can check my blood sugar, and this will send that data straight to Xstrip, so it'll calibrate for you. With calibration, with Bluecon, I have to run OOP algorithm, so I cannot calibrate. So this number is exactly what my Libre app should say if I scan. So not being able to calibrate is an unfortunate limitation. I've had the experience of Libre sensors that read very low. So one of the things that I've heard, which I'm not sure if it works out as well in the end, but if you have a bubble with the Diabox app, you can send data from Diabox to Xtrip, and then you'll be able to calibrate. And then another option, if you have a Mau Mau, you can use the Tomato app, calibrate, and send that straight to Android APS without using Xtrip. So those are the two options if you want to be able to calibrate, in my understanding. So that's what you enter your blood glucose for. You don't have to go into Xtrip to do that. Prime, fill, I can do some pump stuff here. CGM, put in a new CGM, pump battery change. I can add a note, or I can put in data for exercise. So that's more or less and then here's my pump. If you want to use the Omnipod Aeros pods, there's a different branch of Android APS. So what you want to do is join the Facebook group for OmniPi, OMNIPY, and OmniCore. OmniPi is the older one. You probably want to use OmniCore. Maybe it's all integrated in the Android APS branch now, yeah, so there's a special version for that at the time of this recording. So this, it shows I'm connected, stuff like that. No problems. And then we've got a couple, this is all the data. You can see all the data. And then we get to this. This is the local profile. Aside from Xtrip, food, I'm not entering my food. Wear, I am using a Wear watch. Maybe I should pull that out. My Night Scout client. So aside from that, the loop, and if you do anything during that 1 week open loop phase, is make sure this stuff is really good. Take your basal and fast for like a whole day and see, did it work? When was it going high? What was the rate it was going high? When was it going low? And the more you get your local profile dialed in, the more accurate your looping is going to be. Your insulin sensitivity factor, how much milligrams per deciliter will 1 unit of insulin bring you down? If you take 1 unit, does it bring you down 20? Does it bring you down 40? So you want that, the ISF, to be correct. You want to do that. So especially if you're new to pumping, I was new to pumping, my basal rate changed. My basal rate was not the same as on MDI. And then your insulin to carb ratio, your IC, you want that really dialed in. And then your target, you can set your target. Mine's just 90 to 90, 24 hours. So I can go 87 to 90, and it will let me activate that. Let's see if it's changed. But maybe that was just in open loop. I've gotten errors when I tried to make my high number in the target below 90. We'll see if it lets me do that. So, yeah, play with those. That's the main thing you really want to do. Okay, so let's go to our graphs. Let's see. You guys will be talking to a phone here. I'm going to take off some of the settings. We can walk through those. And there's no way for me to pause my recording here, so forgive me. Alright, so here's my graph. I hold this if I want to change the duration. So we'll just use this very short time of the last 5 hours. If I add my prediction, that's what is expected to happen. If I add my basal, I can see that at 7 in the morning, AndroidAPS had to suspend my basal. So, you can see that I was high. My dinner made me go high and it came low. So maybe that's why it was suspending my basal. And it did do a great job keeping me flat, so you'd think, well, that's really good. But actually, this is a problem here. All those suspensions of the basal throughout the night might mean that my basal is too high. Whereas if it's, during this time, after 7, around 8 o'clock, it was raising my basal. So I've got low basals, then, is that raised? I'm not sure if it's raised. Anyway, so that's the basal. When we go to insulin on board, you can see there again, it was about correct, but it went a little bit lower. Whereas before that time, it shot up really high with my meals. So it just had to go a little bit below the line there. So this, you just really want to get good at these. Carbs on board. I didn't enter any carbs for anything that I ate today. It's around noon, and I sort of skipped breakfast. Deviations. Deviations are cool. So deviations, you can get green, gray, and red. Oops. I want the colors to be a little bit big. Green means that the insulin didn't quite do as much as the system expected. Red, it did more than the system expected. So the red, I went low. So my settings are not correct. The system made me go low because the insulin, the setting at that time, had more of an impact than the system expected. So if you're seeing green all the time, maybe that would be like your insulin to carb ratio is wrong. Basically, you want to look at your insulin to carb ratio, something like that. So sensitivity, I don't know that much about interpreting the sensitivity graph, so I'm going to reserve comments. So this is activity here. You see it notes where I put in 1 unit, and then the activity goes up from there. Okay, there's that error I was talking about. Well, let me talk about the action first. So this action starts when I enter that insulin into the system. So I can see, when my blood sugar was high, kind of a cool curve. That insulin matches the curve of the blood sugar spike really well. But that insulin was having an impact all the way to here. So if you're going to go eat, but the activity line is really high, you have a lot of insulin on board in your system, you should be mindful of that. And probably when you go to use your calculator, it's going to give you, it's going to say, what are you doing putting in a bunch of insulin here? You already have a bunch of insulin. So just a rough example, let's say you ate carbs, took a bunch of insulin, but you forgot to put the carbs in, and you entered that you took the insulin. And it's showing you have this massive amount of insulin in your system. When you go to eat again, it's going to say you don't need to take any insulin for the carbs if you forgot to enter the carbs that you took the insulin for. But if you made sure you put in the insulin and the carbs, then it will add that to the math and say, yes, you do still need to take some more insulin. So some of those calculations can be a little bit complicated. So again, the insulin activity can show up on the lower graph too. that's about it. You know, you've got your IOB. There's when I set up my IOB with AMA, it's called the maximum basal IOB. That is the max IOB. So the IOB, the insulin on board, you'll see, you know, the number on the left is the amount of insulin you have in your system. I gave myself a unit, and there's a half a unit left in my system. And then the number on my right is the basal, which is very low right now. Didn't eat so much. Maybe my basal's a bit high. It's 0.1, or so yeah, 0.14. So you can always use that data. With the targets, I tried to set 87 to 88, and I get this error that says value max blood glucose is out of hard limits, is out of the limits, 88 is limited to 90. So I have to go back to my local profile, which in your first week of using this app is where you'll spend your time to fine-tune your basal, your insulin to carb ratio, your ISF. And so I had to go back and set that 87 to 90. It won't let you go less than 90, and I don't think it'll let you go less than 80. However, I can set a custom temporary target. Click that off. For, let's say, 81. You see that? I can set it for 81. And then duration, let's see how long it lets me put it in for. I think the maximum is around a week. So 10,000 minutes. Yeah, so I'm going to angle the phone. There we go. Okay, so I can set a temporary target, and then it'll pop up 81 for the next 168 hours. So there is a way to do that if you're a Bernstein type, you know, and you want your goal to be 83 before, during, and after meals. So you have two major settings areas. You have preferences over here, which is more like technical stuff with the app, and then you have the configuration builder here. So local profile just means I'm getting data not from Night Scout. Rapid acting, ultra acting, free peak, this is the type of insulin you're using. So you have a set for FIASP. Blood glucose source, I'm using extra. GLIMP is an option. Tomato is an option. Eversense is an option. Dexcom, obviously, patched Dexcom app is an option. Night Scout is an option. You can get your data online. You have your pumps here. Omnipod's not listed because I don't have the Omnipod branch, but you've got Dana R, Dana RS, Accucheck, Insight and Combo, Medtronic, and you can also use this before you get your pump with MDI, and it will tell you how much insulin to take with open loop. So sensitivity, detection, so this you'll get to learn, but ORF 0, I understand you want to use with OpenAPS AMA, and ORF 1 you want to use with SMB. And then you get into the artificial pancreas algorithm, MA, AMA, SMB. SMB, there's some limits if you're using Libre. So AMA will just adjust basal. So if the maximum basal rate that I get at any point of the day is, you know, 1, let's say it's 1, so the math's easy, 1 unit per hour, then the maximum AMA, the maximum IOB setting for me will be 3, meaning the system can automatically increase my basal up to 3 units per hour as a maximum. But if you're using SMB, it can do that, the basal, but it can also add a bolus. So those numbers are much higher. loop, turn the loop on. Constraints, you've got constraints from the objectives. Treatment plugins. Remote control Android APS using SMS, so if you want to communicate with text message for your son or daughter who's looping, you can check to use Android Wear. Where's my watch? I feel like I'll grab my watch. So, I wasn't using my watch. I had it on airplane mode. So you can set up your stuff with Wear, it works beautifully. I would say it works really beautifully, and it's a lot more simple. You can use any Wear OS watch, so that makes it pretty easy. Up here you have preferences. Oops. I'm just trying to remember if there's any gems that I wish I had known. Buttons. Calculator button is your most important. Calibration button. Quick wizard settings, like if you have a meal you regularly eat, you can make that as a button you can press. Enable super bolus, that's a feature that you can learn about how to use. Max allowed bolus and carbs. Loop, is the loop on? There's the loop setting here. I'm in OpenAPS AMA. So maximum units per hour a temp basal can be sent to. That's your pump has to have the maximum the same as this app. And then the maximum basal IOB OpenAPS can deliver. AutoSense, which is a thing that you can research. Some information about my pump. The Night Scout, when you're setting up your Night Scout, remember HTTPS. If you're using Heroku, it should be pretty easy. You can set the standard amounts for filling and priming your pump. I still prime my pump using the pump manually and just connect it afterwards because that's easy for me. Wear settings. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple from there. Yeah, the main thing that I wish somebody told me is use the calculator. I was trying to figure that out. I didn't, for some reason. It's like my eyes just passed over the calculator, and I would enter the carbs I was eating, and I would separately enter the insulin. And then someone said, the calculator is giving you data all the time. So my watch is low battery, so I'm gonna have to keep pressing it. So this is the watch. A lot of cool data there. You see the 99, 0 minutes ago. Underneath the arrow is a 0. Change from 5 minutes ago is plus 0. So right there, that plus 0. And I think the -1 is change from 15 minutes ago or expected change, one or the other. And then that 55 is the battery life of my phone. The 0.91, it died already, that's fast. The 0.91 is my basal rate, so that's not the total insulin on board. The IOB is the amount of insulin on board is over here, 0.54. Carbs in my system, carbs on board. And then I've got the graph. So there's a couple features for how to use this. If I double-click the graph, it changes the time that's displayed. And if I double-click the top half, I go to this. And so I can set a temporary target, I can bolus. Most reasonably, you'd want to use the wizard, enter your carbs, and it will start calculating for you. There's no escape And you can, the settings will allow you to change what shows up in your menu. So right now I just have extended carb as a feature we didn't talk about. Like if you want if you're eating a large meal and you want it to dose you over a period of 2 hours, that's going to be useful. That stuff is, yeah. I was going to say, all this dosing is kind of new for me because I've never used a pump. I never even had CGM till like a month ago. Um, yeah, and then there's a few watch faces that you have access to. So that's not your only watch face, including, you know, beautiful oddball stuff. Steampunk. Maybe beautiful grain of salt there. Airplane cockpit. Um, but that watch face that I use is great. And it's not like perfect. I wish I could press this button and get straight into entering the carbs that I'm eating. I wish that, but right now I've got to double click the top, and then I've got to scroll down to Wizard, and so that's not that bad, but I wish there was a way to jump straight to Wizard. But I mainly use my watch to be able to constantly monitor myself. So that was it. The experience is more or less happy for me. There's nothing else that I really want to share. I'm in no way master. I'm new to this, as I say. First time I had a CGM was a month and a half ago. So, and I've never used a pump. And so I just wanted to go through the app settings and things like that. So, yeah. All right. Hope that was useful in some way. Maybe it's not perfect, but for those considering Android APS, that's what I feel like you should know about the app.